the moment Sarah Miller stepped into the hall. The room went quiet in a way that felt sharp and sudden, like a door slamming shut inside her chest. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Laughter faded. Even the soft country music playing from the speakers seemed to hesitate. She didn't need anyone to say her name. She knew. They were all looking at her dot. Sarah stood frozen for half a second. One hand still on the door, heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't planned to come back to this town or this building, or these people who carried pieces of her past without even knowing it. Yet here she was under warm yellow lights, feeling every pair of eyes measure her return. 10 years ago. She had left this lakeside town in Michigan with one suitcase and a broken heart. She told herself it was temporary. Then months became years. Life moved on, but some places never stop remembering you. She took a breath and stepped fully inside. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her shoes. The smell of coffee, old books, and fresh pie wrapped around her, pulling memories she thought she had buried. This was the community hall where fundraisers were held, where weddings started, where people said goodbye. And tonight it held her past and present in the same space. Sarah felt exposed. But she didn't look away. She straightened her shoulders. At 38, she had learned how to carry herself even when fear whispered otherwise. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but it fit her well. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands framing her face. She didn't look like the woman who had left in a rush all those years ago. She looked stronger, quieter, wiser. Whispers began to move. "Is that Sarah Miller? I thought she moved to Chicago." "No, I heard she never came back after what happened." Sarah heard none of it clearly, but she felt it. The weight of unfinished stories pressed gently against her ribs. She had been gone long enough to become a question instead of a person. Then her eyes met his dot. Daniel Brooks stood near the far window, holding a paper cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. His body went still the moment he saw her. For a brief second, the noise in the room faded for both of them. Daniel looked different. Broader shoulders. Lines near his eyes that spoke of responsibility and long days. His hair was shorter now, touched with a hint of gray. But his eyes were the same, calm, observant, deep in a way that once made Sarah feel safe and seen at the same time. Her chest tightened. Daniel hadn't expected her. Not tonight. Not ever. Years ago, he had watched her leave without stopping her, believing silence was the kinder choice. He told himself it was for the best, that life would go on. But standing there now, watching her stand tall in a room full of memories, he realized some things never truly end. They held each other's gaze. Just long enough for the past to stir. Sarah felt the pull immediately. The memories weren't loud, but they were clear. Late-night talks by the lake. Unspoken feelings. Missed chances. A goodbye that never became a conversation. She could leave. The thought came quickly. She could turn around, step back into the night, and no one would stop her. That was her old skill, leaving before things got complicated, before emotions demanded answers. She wasn't ready to give, but something inside her shifted. She remembered Emily's words from earlier that day. Showing up as brave, her friend had said, even if it's uncomfortable. Sarah let out a slow breath and did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was open and real. The kind of smile that said, "I'm here. And I'm not hiding." Then she took another step forward. "Hi," she said, her voice clear, steady enough to surprise herself. "It's been a long time." That was all it took. The tension broke like thin ice. Someone laughed softly. Chairs shifted. Conversation slowly returned, louder this time, less careful. The room seemed to exhale. Emily noticed first. Her eyes widened and she crossed the room quickly, pulling Sarah into a warm hug. "You came," Emily said, smiling like she'd won a quiet victory. "I did," Sarah replied. More people approached. Old neighbors, former classmates, faces she recognized even if she couldn't remember every name. They greeted her with curiosity, warmth, and a few awkward pauses. But no one turned away. No one made her feel unwelcome. Sarah nodded, smiled, listened. She didn't explain herself. She didn't defend her past. She let the moment be what it was, across the room. Daniel watched. He noticed how she stood comfortably now, how she listened more than she spoke. He saw how people leaned toward her without realizing it. There was a calm strength about her that hadn't been there before. She belonged here more than she knew. Daniel wanted to move toward her, but his feet stayed still. He didn't trust the moment. He didn't trust himself. There were things he never said, and he wasn't sure if silence could still protect them. Sarah felt his eyes before she saw him again. She glanced over, meeting his gaze once more. This time, she didn't look away. She gave him a small nod, simple and respectful. Not an invitation, not a rejection, just acknowledgement. Daniel swallowed and nodded back. The night continued. Something had changed. Sarah no longer felt like an outsider. The room felt warmer, familiar, safe in a way she hadn't expected. She moved through the space, greeting people, accepting small talk, letting herself exist without apology. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had left behind. Still, her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel. She wondered if he still lived near the lake, if he still took long walks at night, if he ever thought about how things might have turned out differently. Neil, meanwhile, replayed her smile over and over. The way she hadn't looked afraid, the way she hadn't looked angry, just present. It made him uneasy. He realized then that seeing her again didn't hurt the way he expected. It didn't reopen old wounds. Instead, it raised new questions. What if time hadn't erased everything? What if some things were only waiting? As the evening wore on, Sarah stood near the refreshment table, holding a cup of tea she barely drank. She watched people talk, laugh, reconnect. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the loud kind. The quiet kind that settles slowly, like dusk. She hadn't come back to fix the past. She hadn't come looking for answers. She had come because, for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to stand in a place that once broke her and not fall apart. She didn't know what would happen. Next, she didn't know if she would stay. She didn't know if she and Daniel would ever speak beyond polite words. But as she stood there, surrounded by familiar faces, she understood one thing clearly. Being seen wasn't something to fear. And tonight, instead of running, she had chosen to stay. What Sarah didn't yet realize was that showing up had already changed everything, and the hardest conversations were still waiting just beyond the quiet comfort of this moment. The night wasn't finished with Sarah Miller yet. She felt it the moment the laughter softened and the room settled into smaller circles. The kind of quiet that comes before something honest happens. The kind that makes your heart stay alert. Sarah stood near the long window facing the lake, the dark water stretching wide under the moon. She had faced the room. Now she had to face what she had avoided for years, behind her. Footsteps slowed. She didn't turn right away. But she knew who it was. "Hi, Sarah," Daniel Brooks said, his voice calm but careful. She turned, meeting his eyes without surprise. "Hi, Daniel." The name felt familiar in her mouth, like a word she never forgot how to say. For a second, neither of them moved. The space between them held years of silence, missed chances, and feelings that never fully left. "I didn't think I'd see you again." Daniel said, "I wasn't sure I'd come back." She answered, both statements were true. Neither needed explaining. Daniel shifted his weight, hands in his pockets. "You look good. Not just fine, steady." Sarah gave a small smile. "Life had a lot to teach me. So did this place," he said, glancing around the hall. They shared a quiet moment. Not awkward, just real. The kind of pause that only happens when two people know each other deeply and don't need to fill the space around them. The gathering continued. Voices drifted past. Someone laughed near the kitchen. Plates clinked. Life moved on, unaware of the small storm settling gently between them. "I almost didn't come tonight," Daniel admitted. "I saw the lights on and thought about leaving." "What made you stay?" Sarah asked. He met her gaze. "I figured if I kept avoiding things, I'd never forgive myself." Sarah felt that land inside her. She had lived that way once, leaving before questions could be asked, choosing distance instead of discomfort. "I used to think leaving was strength," she said quietly. "Turns out, staying is harder." Daniel nodded. "But you stayed tonight." "Yes," she said. "I did." They stepped aside to let someone pass, then drifted toward the open doors leading to the deck. The air outside was cool, clean, and filled with the sound of the lake brushing against the shore. The moon reflected on the water, steady and bright. They stood side by side, not touching. "This view hasn't changed," Sarah said. "Some things don't," Daniel replied. "Even when people do." She thought about that, about how she had changed without losing the core of who she was, about how he looked different but still carried the same calm presence. "I used to think you were angry with me," he said. Daniel shook his head. "No, I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of saying the wrong thing, of asking you to stay when I wasn't sure I was enough." Sarah looked down at the water. That fear sounded familiar. "I was afraid to," she admitted. "I thought if I stayed, I'd lose myself." They stood in silence again, letting the truth settle. No blame, no regret. Just understanding that time had shaped them differently. But not beyond recognition. "I'm not asking for anything," Daniel said after a moment. "I just wanted you to know I'm glad you're here." Sarah looked at him then, really looked. She saw the man who had waited when he should have spoken, the man who stayed when she left, the man who had grown without becoming bitter. "I'm glad too," she said. Inside the hall, Emily caught sight of them through the glass. She smiled softly and turned back to her conversation, giving them the space they needed. "I don't know how long I'll be around," Sarah said. "I'm still figuring things out." "That's okay," Daniel replied. "I'm not in a rush." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They meant patience, respect, a chance without pressure. Sarah felt something loosen inside her chest. They went back inside together, still not touching, but no longer distant. People noticed, not in a curious way, but in a quiet, approving one, like watching two old friends find their way back to common ground. The evening began to wind down. Chairs were stacked. Plates cleared. Goodbyes exchanged. One by one, people stepped into the night. Sarah stood near the door, saying her farewells. When the room finally emptied, only a few lights remained on. Daniel waited near the entrance. "Can I walk you to your car?" He asked. "Yes." She said, "Dot outside." The parking lot was quiet. The sky stretched wide, full of stars. They walked side by side, footsteps slow and unhurried. "I used to imagine this moment," Daniel said, almost to himself. "What I'd say if I ever saw you again. And now?" Sarah asked. "Now I think listening matters more." She smiled at that. They reached her car. Sarah turned to face him. "Tonight meant more than I expected," she said. "Thank you for being kind." "Thank you for coming back," he replied. They stood there, the night holding its breath. There was no dramatic goodbye, no promise made, just a quiet understanding that something had shifted. Sarah opened her car door, then paused. "Daniel." "Yes." "I don't know where this leads," she said honestly, "but I don't want to run anymore." His expression softened. "Neither do I." She nodded, then got into the car. As she drove away, she glanced in the mirror and saw him still standing there, watching until she turned the corner. On the drive home, Sarah felt a calm she hadn't felt in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because she had faced what mattered. She had welcomed the past without letting it control her, and for the first time, the future didn't feel heavy. It felt open.